All right, so we're going to continue on with economics. We've got labor, employment, and wages. And we're going to, when this is finished, you should be able to explain how productivity, increases in human capital, unions, and other factors determine wages and income. We have 5 focus questions that we're going to be looking at. First is, what does the demand curve for labor look like? Second is, what does the supply curve for labor look like? The third, why do wage rates differ? Fourth, why are non-money benefit or what are non-money benefits, and how do they factor into comparisons between jobs? And then the last question is, what factors will determine how much you will earn? We have 3 key terms: wage rate, derived demand, and minimum wage law. So people who demand labor are usually referred to as the employers, and people who supply labor are the employees. I'm sure you all know that. The price that you are paid for your labor is called the wage rate. Now, the demand curve for labor is a downward slope, just like all demand curves are, and the supply curve for labor is an upward slope. Where those two intersect is where the equilibrium rate. So demand is just like it was before in chapter 3. Supply is just like it was in I'm sorry, that was chapter 4. This is chapter 5. And then this is chapter 6, where you add the supply and demand together. So in, when we were looking at like goods and services where supply and demand intersected, we called that the equilibrium price. And where supply and demand for labor intersect, we call that the equilibrium wage rate. So if it's above, that means that there's going to be a surplus, and if it's below, that's a shortage. So, and the same things will apply if it's above the equilibrium wages will go down. If it's below, then wages will go up. It's nothing new. Same concept. It's just that it's not dealing with goods and services. Now it's dealing with employers and employees. So, why do some people actually earn more money than others? So, if you were to convert a person's daily salary or a monthly salary into hours, you can actually find out how much a person earns on an hourly basis. And this figure is what a person's wage rate is. So, for example, suppose somebody's making $4,000 per month and they work 160 hours a month, then that person's wage rate is $25 per hour. Supply and demand, it helps us to understand why some people earn higher wages than others. So, for example, wage rates can differ because of the supply of different types of labor. It's not the same. And it's not just that it's not the same in the profession, it's not the same in that profession regionally. So there, if you think about this, right, in the wintertime, there are going to be fewer people demanding manual labor, meaning people that like cut grass and stuff like that. Where in the South, where they're not affected by the same climate, there wouldn't be as drastic of a change. So are money benefits the only thing that matter? All jobs, they come with both money benefits, that's like how much money you make per hour, and then non-money benefits. So look at it this way. Benefits in a job, it just equals your income, the money that you're getting paid, plus your non-money benefits. And so non-money benefits can be lots of different things that have nothing to do with money. So more autonomy, meaning the ability to create or have more freedom to get things done. Being a teacher, you do have a lot of autonomy, generally speaking. Professional growth and meaningful contributions. What that means is, do you feel like what you're doing is actually beneficial to people? And that may be enough for some people. Recognition and appreciation. This is a lot more important than you might actually imagine. There are people who just work incredibly hard so that they can become the employee of the month, or maybe they get a special parking position. Flexible schedules versus a 9 to 5 work day. The option to work from home, and then never having to work weekends or holidays. All of these are examples of non-money benefits. That doesn't mean that those are the only examples, but those are just some examples. So just like with supply and demand before, we have shifters that will shift things to the left and to the right, and that will affect the wage rate. So the demand for labor, it's dependent upon the demand for the good or the service labor that produces. So the demand for labor is often referred to as what's called derived demand, and a derived demand is a demand that is the result of some other demand. It sounds complex, but it's really not. If you think about this, there are certain times of the year in which the number of people that you need working in a store is greater than at other times. So, for example, if it's Black Friday and there are going to be a significantly greater amount of people buying things from the store, you need more people working so that you can restock shelves, run the cash registers, all those things. So the holiday season is a change in the derived demand of the number of workers or the amount of goods supplied. So what are you going to earn? So most of you guys are between the ages of 14 and 18. So if we were to like jump ahead 15 years or so, when you're going to be like 29, 33 years old, at this time you're going to be working at some job and you're going to be earning some wage rate or salary, and you could be earning anywhere between $20,000 and $500,000. It could be even, and it could be more, it could be less. But there are things that determine what you're going to earn, and your wage rate and your salary. It depends on a number of things. One of which is the demand for your labor services. So the demand for you may be high, low, or medium, and the higher the demand for you or your skill set, the higher your wage rate will be. So obviously you want the demand for you to be as high as possible so that you can make as much as possible. So there's two factors that will that make the demand for your services high. The first is the demand for the good that you produce, and the second is your level of productivity. So the greater the demand for the product that you produce, the greater is the demand for your labor services. This could mean that, like, if you think about it, you can be a general practicing doctor or you can be a specialist surgeon, right? The specialist surgeon, even though they're both doctors, can make significantly more money. You've got an elementary school teacher and a high school teacher. The high school teacher can make more money just because of what it is that they're expected to do. So the second factor that relates to demand for you as an employee is your productivity. And the more productive that you are at what you do, the greater the demand for you. And all productivity means is it's your ability to get something done. So if you have two people doing the same job and one person shows a greater aptitude, meaning they're more productive, they're likely to get rewarded for that. So there's a number of factors that can influence your individual productivity. The first is just your innate ability. So you may simply have been born with a greater ability than other people to organize. The examples are like the athletic ability, the ability to sing, or the ability to write. Some people have this just as an innate gift. Other people will have to work and struggle at it to accomplish the same thing. How much effort you put into developing your skills. I read this book by Malcolm Gladwell, and it estimated that people who are professionals at something, they have put in up to at least 10,000 hours of practice before they get to the level at which they become famous, whether it's a basketball player, a pianist, or whatever. So, and then your productivity is affected by the quality and the length of your education. So the higher the quality of your education and the more education that you have, the more productive you will be, all other things being equal. So in fact, statistics show that as a person's educational level rises, so does their income. And this is an example. So each one of these lines on this graph represent a different set of employees. So the blue line, which is at the high end of the unemployment rate, are people that don't have a high school diploma and they're 25 years of age and older. The red line is people who have a high school diploma only. The green line is people who have either an associate's degree or some level of post high school education. And then the purple line is people that have attained a bachelor's degree or higher. Again, the thing that's the same here is the age. That does not change. That's not a variable. The variable is the rate of education. So if you were to look at in 2008, before the Great Recession hit, people who had a bachelor's degree, they had under 2.5% unemployment versus 7.5% for people that were didn't have a high school education. Then you look at it's just the following. It's actually 18 months later, but you look at during the worst time period of the recession, the Great Recession. What was the unemployment rate? So it did double for people that had a bachelor's degree. It went from 2.5 to almost about 5%, but that is not as great as those people that have only a high school diploma or not even a high school diploma. And this holds true even to this day, 2020. So if we look at unemployment rates and earnings, it's an inverse relationship. So people who have a doctoral degree, they earn a great amount of money. They don't earn as much as professionals, and there's actually a reason for that. Professionals are like lawyers and doctors. Doctoral degrees holders are generally professors, and professors usually do earn less money than if they were in the private sector. But there you have it. I don't think there's any mystery to this. I mean, the more education you have, the more you can bring to the table. The more that you can bring to the table in terms of like services or ability, the more you should be able to ask for your wages. So the demand for you as an employee is going to rise with the demand for the product or the service that you produce and your productivity. So this means that when you're 18 years old, you are going to be paid probably a minimum wage. When you're 30 years old and you've been working in the workforce for 12 years or 10 years, whatever it's been, you should be able to demand a higher wage and you should be able to receive a higher wage. So of course, your wage or your salary in the future depends not only on how high or low the demand for you is in the future, but also on the number of people who can do what you do. So in short, it also depends on supply. So this is why when you do things like career cruising and you do the EDP things, I know it seems like a waste of time, but you need to see like what does it require at your end to meet this goal. And if it looks like it's an arduous, very long journey to get to that point, that means there's going to be fewer of you who actually attain that, which means that you can expect demand for your services, and because of that, you should be able to expect a higher wage. If what you do does not require anything in terms of other than just being there, like let's just say a person that runs a cash register that counts out the money for you, I mean, a machine can replace that person. If you look at somebody who does brain surgery, is it possible to replace that person with a machine? Perhaps, potentially in the future, but as of right now, no, it's not. So you want to look at those things. So why is supply high in some labor markets and low in others? Well, the supply of labor offered in a particular labor market is the result of a number of factors, one of which is the ability to perform a particular service. So for example, more people can work as restaurant servers than as brain surgeons. And similarly, more people can drive semi-trucks than can argue and win difficult court cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. So these statements do not put a value judgment on the work of restaurant workers or truck drivers. They just simply report the fact that some tasks can be completed by more people than by others. All other things being equal, the fewer people who can do what you do, the higher your wage or your salary is going to be, which that just makes sense. So the government and minimum wage. So the minimum wage law, it sets a wage floor. That is, it's the level below which hourly wage rates are not allowed to fall. And the law was passed during the Great Depression in the 1930s, and it was initially established a minimum wage of 25 cents an hour. And in 2017, the federal minimum wage was increased to $7.25. And here in Michigan, the minimum wage is it's $9.65. It was $9.45 when I made this presentation, but it's gone up. So the president has nothing to do with setting the minimum wage rate. They talk about it when they run for president, but it's the Congress that determines what the minimum wage is. They're the only entity that has the power to increase or decrease the minimum wage. So earlier we learned about supply and demand and how it determines wage rates. So what really does determine wage rate? Is it the government or is it the supply and demand? And the fact is that supply and demand usually, but not always, determine wages. And this is true for people who are adults. This is not really the case for minors. Minors are, can they be paid more than minimum wage? Definitely. But are they? Generally, no. So this is 2020's updated minimum wage laws. So like Michigan has a minimum wage law of $9.65. So if you're working in a state job, not a federal job, you would earn $9.65. If you're working in a federal job, the minimum wage that you could legally be paid, even in Michigan, would be $7.25. That's not going to happen. That's a baseline, but federal workers, because they're unionized, they make more money than minimum wage. So many people would agree with Congress, because they do agree that the minimum wage is too low, that $7.25 is just not enough for people to be able to live on. Economists, however, they're not so interested in whether Congress is justified in setting a minimum wage as they are in knowing the effects of setting the minimum wage rate above the equilibrium wage rate, which it's a mouthful, but what they're saying is economists think that the government should stay out of setting wages, period. What should really happen is the same thing that happens with prices, which is that the market should determine these. Now, if that were to happen, is it possible that some people would make less than what the current minimum wage is? Definitely. However, Minimum wage is a way for employers to just not have to negotiate with their employees at all. They can just pay them whatever the minimum wage is. So if you're a cashier at a gas station and you have 25 years worth of experience, they can just pay you minimum wage, and you cannot accept that. You can, determine that you're either going to find another job or you're going to lobby your employer for more wages, but they don't have to pay you. Where if there was no federal or state minimum, you would have to negotiate with your employer. And when you're young, it can seem like your employer has all of the cards, like they have the power. But in reality, they need you. And if you can leverage that to your benefit, then all the better for you. Of course, you still need to be productive and able to do the job. One of the things that was being talked about during the lead up to the 2020 election is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And these people that are here are just some of the many people that were running on the Democratic ticket for president. All of these people have dropped out as of today, and it's just Joe Biden running. Um, the thing to understand is we have our demands, we have our supply, and then right here at point E, this is the equilibrium wage rate as it naturally would occur. Okay, so if point A or A and B represent what the minimum wage rate is, this means that we have a surplus. This means that there are people out there who are willing to work but are unable to find a job because the demand side, the employers who want to employ people, they cannot afford to pay this many people. So the question you have to ask yourself is it better to pay these people who are employed the $15 per hour, or is it better to have the market decide what the wage rate is and have close to full employment? It's a tough question. It really is. The thing to keep in your mind, though, is as this line intersects, this means if this is near 100% of people are working and other people want to open up new businesses, that means that the wage rate naturally will increase. Okay? And that's not like guesswork or it's science. I mean, it's been shown. This works on the supply and demand side for goods and services, but the government does not allow that on the wage side. Was it something that was necessary during the Depression? Yeah, I definitely would think it was something that was necessary. Is it something necessarily necessary to have today in 2020? I personally don't think so. $15 minimum wage sounds great, but that would mean that if they're forced to pay that, meaning the employers, that means they have to raise the prices. So the people who are not getting an extra 50, like say me or your parents, right? We're not going to make more money than we currently are. It's the people who are making $9.65 are going to be making the $15. All of us are going to be paying a higher price though for eggs and coffee and gas and everything else. So there's two types of wages. There's the money wage and the real wage. So you can measure a person's wage rate in terms of money. For example, is it 9 or 11 or $100 per hour in terms of what the wages will buy. And if you measure a person's wage rate in terms of money, it gives the person's money wage, which is sometimes the money wage is also called the nominal wage. It shows you like what it can purchase. So measuring a person's wage rate in terms of what it buys gives the person's real wage. So just because you paid $100, right? Does that mean that $100 can buy $100 worth of goods? It sounds strange to say it like that, but what you're doing is you're comparing, as in this case, over a 40-year period, what is the value of the dollar in 1964 versus in 2018? Because if a person was paid $1,000 in 1964 versus a person that was paid $1,000 in 2018, the person in 64 could have bought an incredible amount of goods. The person in 2018 couldn't. So what's going on here? And it has to do with these two things, your money wage and your real wage. So money wage is what you're being paid. Real wage is what you can actually spend that money on. So can a person's money wage rise while the person's real wage falls? Well, the government measures what's called the average price of these goods. And it's called a price index. And there are many price indexes, But one of the most well-known is called the Consumer Price Index, or it's CPI. And the government computes the CPI on an annual basis, and they also do it quarterly too. And what they do is they take what's called a basket of goods, and this is like all kinds of stuff: eggs, butter, milk, gasoline, insurance. What they do is they look at what was the price of it in January, and then they look at it what is the same price for the same goods 3 months later, and then 3 months later, and then 3 months later. And what they do is they show us what's the shift. Like, is there 2%, 4%, 0%, -2% change? Okay, and how do you compute that? Well, real wage is computed by taking the money wage, and then you just divide it by whatever the CPI is. Then the CPI is going to be a relatively small number. Okay. So the CPI inflation calculator, it uses what's called the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, or the CPI-U. So U.S. city average series for all items, not seasonally adjusted, meaning there's no change if it's January or December. And this data, it represents changes in the prices of all goods and services purchased by or for consumption by urban householders. So it doesn't include people in the rural areas. The point is this: if you clicked or go to this URL, and if you were to look, let's assume that you were born in January of 2005, $100 back then, to buy the same amount of goods today, you would need to make or have $135. So that's a 35.28% increase in the CPI inflation between 2005 and 2020. So that's pretty high. So 35%, right? You have to ask yourself or think about this. And when you're 14, you don't think about this. But if you look at, have my wages that I'm paid increased by 35%? The answer might be no. So what that means is your money wage, right, may have gone up by 2%. The real wage, though, has gone down by 30% based on what this says right here, 35%. And that's not a good thing. All right. Have a good day.